question, or our next speaker, which is Olenka. And Olenka Graham Castaneda is a graduate student in my lab here at UC Irvine. And today she is going to be talking about the metaperceptual function, exploring dissociations between confidence and task performance with type 2 psychometric curves. So please take it away, Olenka.
Hi. Okay, I'm unmuted. Cool. Yeah, so my name's Olenka. I'm a graduate student at UCI in Megan's lab, as she mentioned, and I'll be talking to you about dissociations of confidence and task performance. Okay, so our goal of characterizing dissociations between confidence and task performance really fits under a bigger goal of improving the approach in researching metacognition and consciousness, specifically in minimizing confounding variables. So quickly, I'll just talk to you a little bit about consciousness. So under the consciousness umbrella, we have state consciousness and content consciousness. In state consciousness, we're looking at the difference between a state of sleep, wake, and being anesthetized, while in content consciousness, we're more concerned about what you perceive, why, and then how that influences the decisions you make. And we call our qualitative experience of sensory events phenomenal awareness or just awareness. Okay, so like I mentioned, our goal is in minimizing confounding variables, and the variable I'm talking about today is task performance. Okay, so in a given task, high levels of confidence are typically accompanied by high levels of task performance. Like in this graph here, we have as you perform better in a task, you're more likely to say you're more confident in that task. But that's not necessarily happens all the time. So in different either experimental manipulations or because of brain trauma or even because of just spontaneous fluctuations in neural signals, there can be a dissociation between performance and confidence. And I didn't say, but confidence here we're using to just track the general level of awareness of our subjects. Okay, so what do we do? So when measuring or when looking into metacognition and consciousness, we need to consider matching the accuracy across our conditions while leaving the confidence different. And we call this matching match performance different confidence, or MPDC for short. Okay, so because like I said, because confidence and accuracy don't always correlate, we need conditions in which these are matched so we can make meaningful observations about the change in confidence. The takeaway with the dissociation is that because these two processes dissociate, there could be different underlying cognitive processes that contribute to them. And we don't want to be making conclusions about the wrong cognitive process. So in working to account for this confound, we are looking at two specific questions about the MPDC effect, and that is its characterization over different levels of D prime or task difficulty, and also its dependence on temporal organization of trials. Okay, so in our behavioral paradigm, participants viewed full screen displays of moving dots, and they had to judge whether there was downward coherent motion on the left or the right of their screen in one of these two circles. They also had to report how confident they were in that judgment on a scale of 1 through 4. Right, and then what is important to note here is that we're controlling the MPDC effect using dot density in general. So all the results I'm about to show you are coming from our new preprint, which you can find right now. Okay, so first question, characterization of this effect over different levels of D prime. So in this first set of analysis looks at the examined results of fitting type 2 psychometric curves to the confidence and D prime data using a logistic function. And these plots show curve fits to the group average confidence and D prime data. So here we're looking at confidence on the y-axis and D prime on the x-axis. You can think of D prime as task performance, with 4 being subjects found the task easier, and then getting lower D prime values, we can think of the task as harder. These 3 different lines each stand for a different density, dot density. So basically a higher dot density, we're expecting to come with higher reports of confidence. And so the main takeaway with this question is that the MPDC effects are more pronounced at higher levels of D prime or task performance, as you can see the lines separating here, which implies that future experiments using MPDC should seek to use D prime in the range of 2.5 to 3, or otherwise 89% to 93% correct or accurate. Our second question was concerning the temporal organization of the trials. So we looked at blocked versus interleaved trial design. In the block design, you have the different conditions of density all within their own block, and the interleaved, their trials are interleaved together so that you can't predict what comes next. And with this, the main thing we see is that MPDC effects are stronger under a blocked under an interleaved experimental design rather than a blocked one. So in summary, we're looking at the effect of match performance different confidence in order to improve methods for studying metacognition and consciousness. And we found that MPDC effects are more pronounced at higher levels of D prime or task performance, meaning that future experiments should implement MPDC at D prime levels around 2.5 to 3. And we also found that MPDC effects are stronger when the manipulations are under an interleaved trial design rather than a block trial design. But with this, it's important to note that although the effects were stronger in the interleaved condition, there is still some evidence for MPDC effects in the block condition, although there were smaller. So with that, I'd just like to thank everyone else involved in the project, as well as the funding sources and institutions, and Isaac, our postdoc, who also helped with this project. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Olenka. And if you liked the talk, please drop some praise in the chat, because we don't have any clapping that we can do here. So we have one question in the chat so far, and we have quite a bit of time for questions, actually. So this is great. So we'll do the first question. And if you do have other questions, drop them in the chat or use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so the first question comes from Regan, and the question is, would interleaved trials induce sensory adaptation?
I think with the interleaved versus blocked, what we're thinking happens is that the interleaved kind of messes with your ability to change your decision criteria. So it makes it harder to adapt to the new dot density level, which makes our effect better. Great,
thanks. And do we have any other questions rolling in? While we wait for them to roll in, I can ask a couple questions. So the first question that I'd like to ask is, what are the next steps, the next plan for this project?
So we're going to take this project into the scanner now. Isaac is actually going to be doing that part. And then hopefully after that, we're going to be using it to answer another question about phenomenal awareness, and that has to do with its role in action initiation. So our original thinking was looking into whether being aware of the stimulus in front of you would prompt you to interact with it more than if it weren't. And if that was the case, then that would be a really good reason for evolutionarily for us to have phenomenal awareness.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? I can just sit here and ask all of the questions, but I think that we might want to take a few from the audience too. Anybody? All right, well, I can continue asking the questions if you would like to do that, just for a few more minutes until we reach the next tick on the clock. So I was wondering if you, oh, here we go. We have one question, maybe? No raised hand? I saw one. Okay. Feel free to use the Q&A. Okay, we've got another one. So Regan is asking now, have you examined the psychometric function rather than D prime?
Yes, I think we did. Wait, I don't know if I understand the question. So D prime not being included in the examination of the psychometric function? We did a lot of different analysis in a lot of different ways in order to try to figure out how to best characterize all these different parameters and variables. But the answer is probably yes, and you can find it in our preprint.
Okay, I will look there. But maybe it is easier if I ask the question verbally. Is that, we have time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then,
we do. We've got a few minutes.
The reason I ask is that D prime, being a measure of task difficulty, may not necessarily match onto perceptual appearance. And so by looking at the psychometric function, you are looking at how people perceive that, how rather than accuracy per se, because sensory adaptation could make a leftward stimulus look stationary, or stationary look rightward moving. And so you get an estimate of how much perception differs from the objective truth.
So I don't know, so this might answer your question. We did look at dot density over D prime, or as a function of D prime, vice versa, I think. Also at, so that's traditional like psychometric curves. And then we looked at confidence, sorry, hold on. Confidence over, well, I'm gonna have to look back before I mess this up.
That's okay. I can go to the preprint. I just have I've recently published some work similar to what you're doing. So maybe if my question isn't answered in the preprint, I can send you something that I have for you.
Yes,
not to
please.
shamelessly plug, but might be helpful.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And I'll chime in here too. We'd love to see it. So yeah, let's talk afterwards. That'd be great. Thanks.
No problem.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we have a couple more minutes here. If anybody has any other last lingering questions for Olenka. But if not, maybe we can move on to the next talk. Okay, well, if you do have any left over, then you can drop them in the Q&A and we can answer them in a threaded chat, or you can just drop them in the chat. Okay, thanks, Olenka, for a great talk. And we will now move on to our final speaker of